In November of 1952, while everyone in Ridgewood Hollow was preparing for winter, the way they had for 3 generations, 2 orphaned teenage girls were building something the entire town called a giant beehive. Harold Brennan, the man who had built every house within 20 miles for 40 years, stood watching and said the words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Those 2 girls are building their own graves. 3 weeks later, Harold would kneel before that same structure, tears streaming down his weathered face, begging forgiveness for not listening. But this story does not begin with Harold Brennan. It begins with a letter. The envelope arrived at St. Augustine's home for orphaned children on a Tuesday morning in late September. The paper was thick and cream-colored, the kind that whispered of lawyers and important matters. Sister Margaret brought it to the small room where Linnea Thornwood sat on her narrow bed, staring at the wall the way she had stared at walls for 4 years now. Linnea was 18 years old. In 2 days, she would no longer be welcome at St. Augustine's. The home did not keep adults. That was the rule. And rules at St. Augustine's were made of iron and silence. Her sister Wren sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching in a worn notebook. Wren was 14, small for her age, with eyes that noticed everything and a mouth that asked questions most people preferred to leave unanswered. She looked up when Sister Margaret entered. The nun's face held an expression neither girl could read. "There is a man here to see you," Sister Margaret said. "A lawyer. He says your grandmother has passed away." Linnea felt nothing at first. Their grandmother, Astrid Solvang, had been a distant figure for years, a woman they had visited during summers long ago, before the accident that took their parents, before the world narrowed to institutional walls and scheduled meals and the constant low hum of loneliness. The lawyer's name was Cornelius Webb. He was old, with hands spotted by age and eyes that held genuine kindness beneath professional formality. He sat across from the 2 girls in St. Augustine's cold visiting room and explained that Astrid Solvang had died 3 weeks prior. She had left everything to her only grandchildren. Everything, in this case, meant 7 acres of land in a place called Ridgewood Hollow, West Virginia. A place Linnea barely remembered. A place that smelled, in her oldest memories, of pine trees and wood smoke, and something sweet baking in a kitchen she could no longer picture clearly. "There is also this," Cornelius Webb said, and he placed a wooden box on the table between them. The box was made of dark oak, worn smooth by years of handling. Brass hinges held it together. On the lid, carved with careful precision, were 2 intertwined letters, A and E, Astrid and Eric, grandmother and grandfather. "And there is the dough," the lawyer added. From beneath the table came a soft whine. Linnea looked down and saw a retriever mixed with copper-colored fur, 3 years old according to the lawyer, who had been Astrid's companion in her final years. The dog looked up at Linnea with eyes that seemed to recognize something in her face. "Your grandmother insisted the dog go to you," Cornelius Webb said. She was very specific about that. Wren was already on the floor, her arms around the dog's neck. The animal's tail wagged slowly, uncertainly, as if it too was navigating loss and change in the strange territory of new beginnings. "His name is Copper," the lawyer said. "Your grandmother named him for the color of autumn leaves." That night, after Cornelius Webb had gone and the forms had been signed and the future had shifted from impossible to merely terrifying, Linnea opened the wooden box. Inside, she found notebooks. Dozens of them, some old enough that the paper had yellowed to the color of cream, others newer, filled with handwriting she recognized as her grandmother's careful script. There were drawings too, diagrams of structures she did not understand, measurements and angles and notes in a language that was not English. At the bottom of the box, beneath everything else, lay a letter. "My dear girls," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have come home at last. I have waited so long for this day. In this box is everything you need. Trust what your grandfather taught me, what I tried to teach your father before he ran away from this place, what I am now passing to you. A storm is coming. It has always been coming, but you will be ready." Linnea read the letter 3 times, then she read it to Wren, who listened without interrupting, her hand resting on Copper's head. "What does she mean?" Wren asked when Linnea finished. "What storm?" Linnea looked at the notebooks, at the strange diagrams, at the careful measurements recorded across decades. "I do not know yet," she said, "but I think we are going to find out." The bus ride from Richmond to Ridgewood Hollow took 6 hours. They traveled with one suitcase between them, the wooden box and Copper, who lay quietly at their feet as the Virginia countryside gave way to the rising mountains of West Virginia. Ridgewood Hollow revealed itself slowly. First came the narrowing of the road, the way the trees pressed closer on either side, the gradual sense of the world contracting to something smaller and more contained. Then came the town itself, a single main street lined with buildings that looked like they had grown from the earth rather than been built upon it. 847 people lived in Ridgewood Hollow. Linnea would learn this number quickly because in a town that small, everyone counted, and everyone who was new got counted twice. The bus stopped in front of a general store with a faded sign that read, Carver's Dry Goods and Sundries. The driver helped them unload their single suitcase. Copper jumped down and immediately pressed himself against Linnea's leg, uncertain about this new place with its unfamiliar smells and watching eyes. Because there were watching eyes. Linnea felt them before she saw them. Faces in windows, people pausing on the sidewalk. The particular quality of attention that small towns reserve for strangers. A man emerged from the general store. He was perhaps 45, with the build of someone who had done physical labor his whole life, and the expression of someone who had learned to calculate profit from every interaction. His name, Linnea would learn, was Josiah Carver, and he owned not just the store but a significant portion of the town's good opinion of itself. You must be the Thornwood girls, Josiah Carver said. His smile did not reach his eyes. We heard you were coming. Terrible shame about your grandmother. She was a character, that one. Kept to herself mostly, up on that hill. Linnea thanked him for his condolences and asked for directions to the property. Josiah Carver's smile flickered. The property. Yes. Well, he paused, and in that pause, Linnea heard calculations being made. It is about 2 miles out of town, up the old mountain road, but I should warn you there is not much left. The house came down in a storm last year, just the foundation now in an old shed. We will manage, Linnea said. Josiah Carver looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Wren, who was small and young and obviously out of place in this town built for people who had been born here and would die here, and never questioned the distance between those two events. 2 girls alone, Josiah Carver said slowly. No family, no income, no proper shelter. He shook his head with practiced sympathy. That is a hard situation. A very hard situation. If you ever decide the land is too much trouble, I would be willing to take it off your hands. Fair price, enough for you to start over somewhere more suitable. Linnea felt Wren stiffen beside her. She put a hand on her sister's shoulder. Thank you for the offer, Linnea said. We will keep it in mind. But she would not keep it in mind. She knew that already, knew it in the same way she knew the color of her own eyes, knew it with a certainty that came from somewhere deeper than thought. This land was hers. This land was Wren's, and no one was going to take it from them. They walked the 2 miles to the property as the sun began its descent toward the mountain ridges. The road climbed steadily, switching back on itself, revealing views of the valley below that took Linnea's breath away despite her exhaustion. Copper walked between them, his tail gradually lifting as the smells became more familiar, more like something he remembered. The property announced itself with a gap in the trees and a rusted mailbox that still bore the name Solvang in a faded paint. Beyond the mailbox, a dirt track led upward through a stand of oaks whose leaves had turned the color of fire. And there, at the top of the rise, Linnea saw what remained of her grandmother's life. The house was gone, just as Josiah Carver had said. Only the stone foundation remained, a rectangular outline that spoke of rooms that no longer existed, of walls that had sheltered and failed. Beside the foundation stood a small wooden structure, barely larger than a garden shed, with a slanted roof and a door that hung slightly crooked on its hinges. But it was not the destruction that caught Linnea's attention. It was the view. From this spot, she could see the entire valley spread out below. Ridgewood Hollow nestled in the bottom like a child's toy village, its straight streets and square houses arranged in orderly patterns. The mountains rose on either side, their rounded shoulders dark with evergreens, their peaks already touched with the first suggestion of winter snow. Her grandmother had chosen this place, had lived here for decades, had died here, alone waiting for granddaughters who came too late. Linnea felt tears on her face and did not wipe them away. Beside her, Wren said nothing. She simply reached out and took her sister's hand. Copper walked forward, sniffing the ground, and stopped at the door of the small shed. He looked back at them and whined softly. "He remembers," Wren said quietly. This was his home. Linnea squeezed her sister's hand. Then she walked forward, pushed open the crooked door, and stepped into what would become their shelter for the coming weeks. The shed was larger inside than it appeared from outside. Rough wooden walls enclosed a space perhaps 12 feet by 15, with a packed earth floor and a single window that faced east toward the sunrise. There was a wood stove in one corner, small but functional. A stack of firewood against one wall, a simple cot with a threadbare blanket, and on a shelf above the cot, another notebook. Linnea reached for it. The leather cover was worn, the pages soft with age and handling. She opened it to the first page and found handwriting she did not recognize, angular and precise, with notes in English interspersed with words in what she now understood was Norwegian. This was her grandfather's hand. Erik Solvang, who had come to America in 1920, who had brought with him knowledge that his wife had spent decades preserving, who had died in 1945, 7 years before Linnea was born. She turned pages slowly, carefully. Diagrams emerged, structures unlike anything she had seen. Curved walls, domed roofs, measurements marked with mathematical precision. And then, near the middle of the notebook, she found a drawing that made her stop breathing. It was a shelter, not square, not rectangular, but round. A dome rising from the earth like a natural formation, like something that had grown rather than been built. Beside the drawing, in her grandfather's careful hand, were words that would change everything. The wind seeks corners, remove the corners, and the wind passes beyond. This is the knowledge of Sadistal. This is what kept our people alive when the storms came. Linnea stared at the drawing for a long time. Then she went back outside where Wren was exploring the property with Copper, and she looked at the land with new eyes. Behind the shed, where the ground rose slightly before leveling into a small plateau, she saw disturbed earth, stones arranged in a pattern, the beginning of something. She walked closer, her heart beating faster. The stones formed a curve, a perfect arc, partially buried by weeds and fallen leaves, but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Her grandmother had begun this, had started building the shelter from her husband's designs, had worked on it alone in secret until age or illness or death had stopped her. Linnea knelt and brushed away the debris. Beneath one of the foundation stones, protected from the elements, she found a folded piece of paper. For Linnea and Wren, it read, "I could not finish it." "But you can. The storm is coming, my darlings. I have felt it all my life. Build what your grandfather designed, and you will survive what others cannot imagine." Wren appeared beside her rudder, reading over her shoulder. "What storm?" Wren asked again. Her voice was small, uncertain. Linnea looked up at the sky, at the mountains, at the valley spread out below where 847 people went about their lives, believing that tomorrow would look exactly like today. "I do not know," Linnea said, "but grandmother knew, and grandfather knew before her, so we are going to trust them." She stood up, the paper clutched in her hand, her grandfather's notebook under her arm. "We are going to build this shelter," she said, "exactly the way he designed it." Wren looked at the curved foundation stones, at the strange diagrams visible on the notebook's open pages. "People are going to think we are crazy," Wren said. Linnea almost smiled. "Probably. They are going to laugh at us, almost certainly." Wren was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded, a small, decisive movement that reminded Linnea suddenly and painfully of their mother. "Good," Wren said. "I never like people who laugh at things they do not understand." And that was how it began. 3 days later, Linnea stood before the Ridgewood Hollow Town Council. The meeting room was in the basement of the Methodist Church, a space that smelled of old hymnals and coffee that had been reheated too many times. 7 people sat behind a long table. Linnea recognized Josiah Carver among them, his expression carefully neutral. Beside him sat a man in clerical collar who introduced himself as Pastor Daniel Whitmore. At the end of the table, wearing the star of local law enforcement, sat Sheriff Roy Tatum. The council had summoned her. That was how the letter had phrased it. Summoned, as if she were a child being called to the principal's office. As if she had already done something wrong simply by existing in a place where she was not expected. Miss Thornwood, Pastor Whitmore began, his voice carrying the particular warmth of someone about to deliver bad news with good intentions. We want you to know that this community cares about the welfare of young people. That is why we asked you here today. Linnea waited. She had learned in 4 years at St. Augustine's that silence was often the best response to people who wanted to tell you what was good for you. Your situation concerns us, the pastor continued. 2 young women alone without family or income or proper shelter. Your sister is only 14, a child really, and you, while legally an adult, are barely more than a child yourself. I am 18, Linnea said, and my sister is my responsibility. Josiah Carver leaned forward. That is precisely the concern, Miss Thornwood. You are 18. You have no job, no income, no proper house. How do you intend to provide for a minor child? Linnea felt anger flicker in her chest, but kept her voice steady. The land provides. There is a well. There is wood for fuel. We have supplies to last several months. I will find work when needed. Sheriff Tatum spoke for the first time. His voice was gruff, impatient. The law is clear on this, Miss Thornwood. A minor requires proper guardianship, proper shelter, proper care. If you cannot provide those things, the state has an obligation to intervene. The words hung in the air like a threat. What exactly are you saying? Linnea asked quietly. Pastor Whitmore spread his hands in a gesture meant to convey reasonableness. We are saying that you have 60 days to demonstrate that you can provide a suitable environment for your sister. Proper shelter, some form of income or support. If you cannot do that by November 22nd, we will have no choice but to contact Child Welfare Services. Your sister would be placed in a proper facility for her own good. 60 days. Linnea looked at each face in turn. Josiah Carver, who wanted her land. Pastor Whitmore, who believed he knew what was best. Sheriff Tatum, who saw only rules and the power to enforce them. None of them knew about the notebooks. None of them knew about the curved foundation stones behind the shed. None of them knew that her grandmother had spent 30 years preparing for something that everyone else refused to see coming. I understand, Linnea said. 60 days. She turned and walked out without waiting for a response. That evening, she told Wren everything. They sat in the shed as darkness fell outside, a small fire burning in the wood stove. Copper stretched out between them with his head on Wren's lap. The notebooks lay open on the floor, their grandfather's diagrams illuminated by candlelight. So we have 60 days, Wren said when Linnea finished. She did not sound scared. She sounded thoughtful, calculating. 60 days to build a shelter that proves we can take care of ourselves. Linnea nodded, but it is not just about proving anything to them. Grandmother said a storm is coming. Grandfather designed this shelter to survive storms. If we build it right, we will have a home, a real home, something no one can take away from us. Wren looked at the diagrams, the curves and angles and mathematical notations. I do not understand most of this, she said. Neither do I, not yet, but I am going to learn, and I need your help. You are good at drawing, good at seeing how things fit together. I need you to copy these diagrams, to help me understand them. Wren was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled her sketchbook from her bag and opened it to a fresh page. Tell me where to start, she said. They worked late into the night, Linnea reading from the notebooks while Wren translated the diagrams into drawings she could understand. They learned that their grandfather had come from a region of Norway called Setesdal, where people had been building structures to withstand brutal winters for over 1,000 years. They learned about thermal mass and wind deflection and the simple, profound principle that had shaped their grandfather's designs. The wind seeks corners. Remove the corners, and the wind has nothing to grip. Build round, and you build something that endures. The shelter their grandfather had designed was 18 feet in diameter, 12 feet high at its peak. The walls would be built from oak and clay, curved and thick, capable of maintaining stable temperatures regardless of conditions outside. The entrance would face east, away from the prevailing western winds. A small wood stove would provide supplemental heat, though the design promised that even without fire, the structure would remain significantly warmer than any conventional building. It was elegant. It was strange. It was nothing like anything anyone in Ridgewood Hollow had ever built, and Linnea was going to build it in 60 days. She began the next morning. The first task was constructing a steam box, a device that would allow her to bend wooden beams into the curves the design required. Her grandfather's notes were specific: an 8-foot wooden chamber, a water source, a fire beneath to create steam, timing precise to the thickness of the wood, 1 hour of steaming for every inch of thickness. Linnea had never built anything more complicated than a birdhouse, but she had her grandfather's notes. She had her grandmother's faith, and she had something else, something that had been forged in 4 years of institutional walls and scheduled meals, in the constant quiet knowledge that she and Wren had only each other. She had stubbornness. She had the particular kind of determination that comes from having nothing left to lose. For 3 days, she worked on the steam box alone. She salvaged materials from the ruined house foundation. She cut and measured and assembled, her hands blistering and then callousing, her muscles aching in ways she had never experienced. Wren helped where she could, mixing clay, carrying water, watching and learning and recording everything in her sketchbook. On the 4th day, word reached town about what the Thornwood girls were doing on their grandmother's land. On the 5th day, Harold Brennan came to see for himself. Harold Brennan was 63 years old. He had built his first house at 17 and had not stopped building since. Every structure in Ridgewood Hollow bore his mark, either directly or through the apprentices he had trained over the decades. He was not a cruel man. He was not an unkind man. He was simply a man who believed absolutely in the rightness of his own experience, in the accumulated wisdom of 46 years of honest work, in the fundamental truth that some ways of doing things were right and other ways were wrong. When he drove his truck up the mountain road and saw what Linnea Thornwood was building, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt confused. The steam box made no sense to him. The curved foundation stones made no sense. The girl herself, small and determined, working alone while her younger sister sketched in a notebook, made no sense at all. He got out of his truck and walked closer. Linnea saw him coming, but did not stop working. She was measuring a beam, marking points with careful precision. Harold Brennan stood at the edge of the work area and watched for several minutes. Then he spoke. "Those lines are wrong," he said. Linnea looked up briefly. "They are not lines. They are guides. Guides for what?" "For the curves." Harold Brennan shook his head. The gesture was not unkind, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Nobody builds with curves around here, girl. Never have. Never will. Square corners are how you build something strong." Linnea returned to her measuring. "Square corners are how you build something that fails in high winds. Remove the corners, the wind has nothing to grip." The words were her grandfather's from the notebook, but they came out of her mouth as if she had known them her whole life. Harold Brennan stared at her. Then he laughed, not cruelly exactly, but with the confidence of someone who knew he was right. "Listen here," he said. "I have been building houses for 46 years. I have seen what works and what does not. What you are doing here, these curves and whatnot, it is going to fail. Probably collapse before you finish it." Linnea finally stopped working. She straightened up and met his eyes. "You will see," she said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. Harold Brennan's smile faded. Something in the girl's calm certainty unsettled him in a way he could not name. He turned and walked back to his truck. As he drove away, he said the words that would spread through Ridgewood Hollow by nightfall. "Those two girls are building their own graves. Now I want to pause here for a moment and ask you something. Have you ever been absolutely certain that you knew better than everyone around you? Have you ever felt in your bones that you were right about something, even when every voice you heard told you that you were wrong? Think about that. Think about what it takes to keep going when the whole world is laughing. Because that is exactly what Linnea Thornwood did. If this story is resonating with you so far, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. You are not going to want to miss what happens next. The mockery spread quickly. In small towns, news travels at the speed of gossip, which is considerably faster than light. By the end of the first week, everyone in Ridgewood Hollow knew about the Thornwood girls and their crazy round building. People drove up the mountain road just to stare. Children rode bicycles past and pointed and laughed. Looks like they are building a giant beehive. No, it is one of those igloos, like the Eskimos make. My daddy says nothing round ever lasted in these mountains. $10 says it collapses before Thanksgiving. Linnea heard all of it. She heard the whispers at the general store when she went to buy supplies. She saw the looks, the shaking heads, the particular kind of pity that is really just contempt wearing a mask of concern. She did not respond. She did not argue. She did not try to explain. She just kept working. The steam box came together slowly, each piece fitted and refitted until it met the specifications in her grandfather's notes. She learned through failure. The first version leaked steam from a dozen gaps. The second held pressure but could not maintain consistent temperature. The third, rebuilt with rivets instead of nails, just as the notebook specified, finally worked. The first beam she bent was a revelation. She watched the steam soften the oak fibers, felt the wood become pliable under her hands, guided it into a curve that would have been impossible otherwise. When it cooled and held its shape, she stood looking at it for a long time. This simple piece of curved wood that represented everything her grandfather had tried to teach her grandmother, that her grandmother had tried to teach her father, that her father had run away from because he could not bear to be different. She was not going to run. On the 10th day, an old woman came walking up the mountain road. Her name was Martha Briggs, and she was 78 years old. She had lived in Ridgewood Hollow her entire life, which meant she had seen things that younger people had forgotten or never known. She walked with a cane, but refused to use it, carrying it instead like a weapon she might need at any moment. She found Linnea wrestling with a curved beam, trying to fit it into position on the growing frame of the shelter. Wren was mixing clay nearby, her hands stained red-brown. Copper lay watching, his tail stirring dust whenever one of the girls looked his way. Martha Briggs stood at the edge of the work area for a long time, saying nothing. Her eyes moved slowly over the curved framework, the steam box, the notebook spread open on a makeshift table. Finally, she spoke. "I knew your grandfather." Linnea nearly dropped the beam. She set it down carefully and turned to face the old woman. "Eric Solvang," Martha Briggs continued. "He came here in 20, him and your grandmother both. She was pregnant with your father then, though nobody knew it yet. Strange people, everyone said. Built strange things. Talked about storms like they could see the future." "You knew him," Linnea repeated. The words felt strange in her mouth. "Knew him well enough. He tried to teach people here how to build the way his people built in the old country. Round things, curved things, things that did not look right to American eyes." She paused, her weathered face unreadable. Nobody listened. Too proud. Too certain they already knew everything worth knowing. "What happened?" Martha Briggs was quiet for a moment. "He built one structure. Just one. A small one over on the Henderson property. When he died, people tore it down. Said it was an eyesore. Said it did not belong." Linnea felt something cold settle in her chest. "They destroyed it." "They did. But I remember it. I remember how it looked standing there, round and strange and solid. I remember thinking it looked like something that could last forever if people would just leave it alone." She stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the curved framework rising from the earth. "Round things last," she said softly. "Square things break. That is what Eric Solvang used to say." I thought about those words a lot over the years. Every time I saw a barn collapse in a storm. Every time the wind tore the corner off somebody's roof. Round things last. Square things break. Wren had stopped mixing clay. She stood watching, listening. "Why are you telling us this?" Linnea asked. Martha Briggs finally smiled. "Because you are going to need someone on your side before this is over. And because I am too old to care what people think of me anymore." She reached into her coat and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Brought you some food," she said. "You girls look like you are not eating enough. Hard to build something that matters on an empty stomach." The days blurred together. Linnea woke before dawn and worked until she could not see anymore. Her hands cracked and bled and healed and cracked again. Her shoulders ached constantly. She lost weight she could not afford to lose. But the shelter grew. The framework rose from the foundation like something organic, like a living thing reaching toward the sky. Each curved beam fit into its place with the precision her grandfather's calculations demanded. The shape emerged slowly, a dome that caught the light differently than any building in Ridgewood Hollow. that seemed to belong to the landscape in a way the square houses below never had. Wren worked beside her every day. The girl who had seemed so fragile at St. Augustine's revealed a core of steel that Linnea had never fully recognized. She mixed clay until her arms trembled. She held beams in place for hours while Linnea secured them. She recorded every measurement, every adjustment, every hard-won lesson in her sketchbook. And she asked questions, endless questions. Why does the entrance face east? To avoid the prevailing western winds. Why is the wall so thick? Thermal mass. The clay and wood absorb heat during the day and release it at night, like a battery for warmth. Why does the roof curve so much? So snow and rain slide off. Nothing accumulates to add weight or find gaps. Linnea answered what she could. When she did not know, she said so, and they figured it out together. Emmett Cole appeared on the 18th day. He was 17, the son of a farmer whose land bordered the Thornwood property. Tall and quiet, with hands already roughened by years of labor, he came walking up the mountain road with the particular aimlessness of someone who wants to seem like they are not going anywhere specific. He stood at the edge of the work area for nearly an hour, watching without speaking. Copper went to investigate him, sniffed his boots, and apparently found him acceptable, because he sat down beside the boy and stayed there. Finally, Emmett spoke. "My father says you are both crazy." Linnea did not look up from her work. "Your father is not alone in that opinion. He says that thing will fall down in the first hard wind. It will not." "How do you know?" "Because my grandfather knew, and my grandmother knew, and I trust them more than I trust your father." Emmett was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question that changed everything. "Can you show me how it works?" Linnea stopped. She looked at him, really looked, and saw something she recognized. Curiosity, the kind that does not accept easy answers, the kind that wants to understand. She picked up her grandfather's notebook and opened it to the page with the wind diagrams. "Have you ever noticed," she said, "that round trees survive storms better than square buildings at ours?" Emmett blinked. "I never thought about it." "Think about it now. The wind hits a flat surface, it pushes straight against it. All that force, concentrated. But the wind hits a curve. It slides around. The force disperses. The structure stays." She showed him the diagrams, the calculations, the principles that her grandfather had learned in Norway and brought across an ocean and tried to share with people who would not listen. Emmett Cole listened, and then he came back the next day to help. What Emmett did not tell Linnea that first day was what he had heard the night before. His father, Abel Cole, sat on the town council. Emmett had grown up hearing council business discussed at the dinner table, arguments about road repairs and property taxes, and all the small machinery that kept a town running. He had learned to tune it out. But 3 nights ago, something different had happened. Josiah Carver had come to their house after dark. Emmett was supposed to be asleep, but he heard voices in the kitchen, low and urgent. He crept to the top of the stairs and listened. "The Thornwood land has an underground spring," Carver was saying. "Best water source in the valley. Worth 10 times what that old woman paid for it 50 years ago." Abel Cole's voice was hesitant. "The girls have legal claim." The will was clear. "Legal claims can be challenged," Carver replied. 2 orphans with no income, no proper shelter, no adult supervision. The council gives them 60 days. When they fail, and they will fail, the land gets seized for back taxes. "I have a buyer lined up already, someone from out of state who will pay real money." "And what do we get?" Abel asked. Carver's laugh was soft and cold. 10%, each council member who votes the right way. "That is a lot of money for doing nothing except letting nature take its course." Emmett had not slept that night. He had lain awake thinking about the 2 girls on the hill, the strange round structure, the way Linnea had spoken about wind and curves and things that lasted. Now, standing beside the growing framework, watching her work with such fierce determination, he made a decision. "Linnea," he said quietly, "there is something you need to know." He told her everything. Linnea listened without interrupting. When he finished, her face was calm, but her hands had tightened into fists. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "What are you going to do?" Linnea looked at the shelter, at the curved walls rising against the autumn sky. "I am going to finish building," she said, "and I am going to make sure that when their 60 days are up, There is nothing left to challenge. The steam box collapsed on the 23rd day. One weak joint, one moment of metal fatigue, and the whole structure came apart with a sound like a gunshot. Steam and splinters everywhere. Linnea standing in the ruins, a burn on her forearm from where the hot metal had grazed her, staring at 3 weeks of work destroyed in an instant. Wren found her sitting in the dirt an hour later, not crying but not moving either, just sitting there with her burned arm cradled against her chest and her eyes empty. Copper lay beside her, pressed against her side, whining softly. Wren sat down across from her sister. She did not say anything. She just pulled out the notebook she had been sketching in for weeks and started turning pages. Linnea watched without really seeing. Then Wren stopped on a page that Linnea did not recognize. "Found this," Wren said. It was stuck between two other pages. "I do not think grandmother knew it was there." She held out the notebook. Linnea looked. Her grandfather's handwriting, diagrams of a steam box, and a note in the margin, underlined twice. "Common mistake. Joints welded or nailed will fail under pressure. Use rivets. Nothing else will hold." Linnea stared at the words. She had used nails, regular nails, because that was what she had, because she had not found this page, because she had not known. But now she knew. She looked up at Wren, at her little sister, who had found a hidden page, who had saved them both from giving up. "We rebuild," Linnea said. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "We rebuild," Wren agreed. Beneath the wreckage of the steam box, Linnea found a small metal box she had never seen before. It was wedged into the frame, hidden, placed there deliberately by hands that knew what they were doing. Inside, protected from heat and steam, were three things: a photograph, their grandmother and grandfather, young and hopeful, standing in front of a small, round structure, and between them a boy, perhaps 10 years old, their father, a birth certificate. Edward Solvang Thornwood, born Ridgewood Hollow, 1921. A letter. Linnea read the letter with shaking hands. It was from her grandmother, written years ago, addressed to children who might never read it. "Your father grew up here, on this land, in the shadow of his father's dreams. He learned everything Eric tried to teach. The curves, the calculations, the wisdom of Sadistal. But when Eric died, when the town tore down what he had built, your father could not bear to stay. He ran away from this place, from the mockery, from the memory of a father whose ideas were too strange for American minds. He ran all the way to Richmond, where he met your mother, where he built a life that looked like everyone else's life, where he forgot everything he knew about how to survive what was coming. I tried to tell him. Year after year, I tried. The storms are getting worse, I said. The old knowledge matters more now than ever. But he would not listen. He could not face what listening would mean. And now you are here reading this, which means I am gone and your father is gone, and you have come home at last. Do not run, my darlings. Do not let their laughter drive you away. Build what your grandfather designed. Trust what I could not finish. And when the storm comes, remember that you carry the wisdom of 1,000 Norwegian winters in your blood." Linnea finished reading. She looked at Wren, who had tears streaming silently down her face. "Dad knew," Wren whispered. "He knew how to build like this, and he forgot." "He did not forget," Linnea said. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. "He chose not to remember, because remembering was too hard." She stood up. Her arms still throbbed where the burn was already blistering. Her body ached from weeks of labor. Her soul felt stretched thin by grief and hope and the weight of legacy. But she was not going to run. "We have 37 days," she said. "We need to rebuild the steam box and finish the shelter. We need to prove that grandmother was right, that grandfather was right, that everything they tried to teach was worth teaching." Wren wiped her eyes. Then she nodded. "Where do we start?" she asked. Linnea looked at the curved framework rising against the autumn sky, the bones of a shelter that would stand when everything else fell. "We start," she said with rivets. "Here is another place where I want to pause. Think about the people in your life who believed in something others called crazy. Your grandmother who planted a garden everyone said would never grow. Your mother who went back to school when everyone said she was too old. Your friend who started a business when everyone said it would fail. What would have happened if they had given up? Leave a comment telling me about someone in your life who kept going when everyone told them to stop. I read every comment, and I would love to hear your story. The days that followed were the hardest of Linnea's life. She rebuilt the steam box with rivets this time, just as her grandfather's notes specified. Emmett helped, bringing materials from his father's farm in secret, risking everything to be part of something he did not fully understand but somehow believed in. Martha Briggs came every day with food and quiet encouragement. Copper watched over them all, his copper-colored fur a warm presence at the edge of every difficult moment. And the skeptics kept coming. Pastor Daniel Whitmore arrived on the 32nd day, wearing his clerical collar and an expression of practiced concern. He walked around the half-finished shelter, touching the curved walls, shaking his head slowly. "This does not look like any structure I have ever seen," he said. "Are you certain this is the right approach?" Linnea kept working. "I am certain. People are worried about you," the pastor continued. "Two young women alone, building something so unusual. Some folks are saying it is not natural, that perhaps you are not in the right state of mind." Linnea stopped. She turned to face him. "Pastor Whitmore," she said carefully, "my grandfather built structures like this in Norway. They survived storms that killed people in conventional buildings. My grandmother believed in this design so much, she spent 30 years preparing for us to complete it. I am not crazy. I am not confused. I am building something that works." The pastor studied her for a long moment. He was not a bad man, Linnea realized. He genuinely thought he was helping. That was almost worse than simple cruelty. "I will pray for you," he said finally, "and I hope, for your sake and your sister's sake, that you know what you are doing." Sheriff Roy Tatum came the next week. He stood at the edge of the property with his hand on his gun belt, not threatening exactly, but not friendly either. His eyes moved over the shelter, the curved walls now rising nearly to their full height, the strange shape that looked nothing like law and order and the proper way of doing things. "Got some complaints," he said. "People saying this structure does not meet building codes." Linnea climbed down from where she had been working on the roof frame. "What building codes, Sheriff? This is private property. We are not in town limits." Sheriff Tatum's jaw tightened. "That may be. But I am here to tell you that if this thing is not safe, if anyone gets hurt because of your unusual construction, you will be held responsible." "No one is going to get hurt," Linnea said quietly. The sheriff looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Wren, who was watching from the doorway of the shed, then at Emmett Cole, who had stopped working when the law arrived. "Your deadline is in 28 days, the sheriff said. "If you do not have suitable shelter by then, I will be back, and I will have paperwork." He turned and walked to his truck. After he left, Emmett let out a breath he had been holding. "That man could make trouble for you. He already has," Linnea said. "But trouble is not going to stop us." The framework was completed on day 42. Linnea stood back and looked at what they had built. The skeleton of the shelter rose from the earth like a great curved rib cage, each beam bent and fitted with mathematical precision. The whole structure, somehow both delicate and incredibly strong. Tomorrow they would begin applying the clay mixture to the walls. In 2 weeks, if everything went according to plan, they would have a finished shelter. It was going to be close. Too close. That night, something changed in the weather. Linnea noticed it first in Copper's behavior. The dog would not settle. He paced from the shed to the shelter framework and back, whining softly, staring at the western sky as if he could see something the humans could not. Then she noticed the birds. For weeks, the trees around the property had been full of autumn migrants, birds passing through on their way south. Suddenly, they were gone, not gradually thinning out. Gone. The silence was so complete, it felt like pressure against her eardrums. She pulled out her grandmother's notebook, the one with weather observations spanning 3 decades, flipped to a page she had marked. Birds departing early. Unusual silence. Pressure changes. Unseasonable warmth followed by rapid cooling. These are signs of violent rotation. When you see them, you must be ready. Linnea walked outside and looked at the sky. It was November. Too late in the year for tornadoes. Everyone knew that. The textbook said so. The weather forecasters said so. Common sense said so. But the sky did not look right. The clouds had a strange stacked quality, layers moving in different directions, the light taking on a greenish tint that made shadows look wrong. She went back inside and started working faster. November 15th arrived cold and clear. The shelter was finished. Linnea stood in the center of the completed structure and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Pride. Not arrogance, but the quiet satisfaction of having done something difficult, something meaningful, something that mattered. The walls curved around her in a perfect dome, 18 feet across, 12 feet high at the peak. The clay and wood construction was smooth to the touch, already radiating a subtle warmth from the thermal mass effect her grandfather's notes had promised. The entrance faced east, a small airlock design that would prevent heat loss. A tiny wood stove sat in the center, its chimney rising through the dome's apex. Wren stood beside her, sketchbook in hand, documenting every detail. "We did it," Wren said softly. She sounded almost surprised. "We did." Emmett Cole stood in the doorway, grinning. "Never seen anything like it." He ran his hand along the curved wall. "It feels different in here. Warmer, quieter." Linnea nodded. The curves disperse sound, just like they disperse wind. Everything about this design is intentional. That evening, Martha Briggs came to see the finished shelter. She walked around the interior slowly, touching the walls, looking up at the curved ceiling, saying nothing for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "Eric would have been proud," she said. Her voice was rough with emotion. "He spent his whole life trying to show people something better. Died thinking nobody understood. But look at this. His knowledge passed down, built into something real. That means something. That means everything." Linnea felt tears prick her eyes but did not let them fall. "Thank you," she said, "for believing in us." Martha Briggs shook her head. "I did not do anything except watch and bring sandwiches. You girls did the believing, you did the building. I just had the good sense to recognize something true when I saw it." The next 5 days brought more signs. The temperature swung wildly, 65 degrees one day, 32 the next. The barometric pressure dropped and rose and dropped again, making ears ache and heads pound. Dogs throughout Ridgewood Hollow would not stop barking. Old-timers said their joints hurt in ways they had not hurt in years. Linnea watched and waited and said nothing. On November 20th, she tried to warn them. She walked into town, into Carver's store, where people gathered to gossip and exchange news. The room fell silent when she entered. Josiah Carver watched her with barely concealed hostility. "There is a storm coming," Linnea said. Her voice was steady. "Not winter weather. Something worse. I have been watching the signs my grandmother documented. The birds leaving early, the pressure change, the unusual warmth followed by cold. These are patterns that precede violent weather." Someone laughed. Derek Simmons, 20 years old, the one who had organized the betting pool on when the beehive would collapse. "Violent weather in November," he said. "In the mountains. Sure, sweetheart. Maybe your magic round building can predict the future too." More laughter. Linnea looked at Harold Brennan, who stood near the back of the store. The old carpenter's face was unreadable. "I am not asking you to believe me," Linnea said. "I am asking you to be prepared. Stock extra supplies. Reinforce your structures. Have a plan for shelter." Josiah Carver shook his head with exaggerated patience. "Miss Thornwood, we appreciate your concern, but people have lived in this valley for over 100 years. We know our weather, we know our land, and we know that tornadoes do not happen here in November." He smiled, and the smile had teeth. "Maybe you should focus on getting your own affairs in order before the deadline," he continued. 2 days left, is it not? Time is running out for all sorts of things." Linnea held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned and walked out. Harold Brennan found her that night. He drove up the mountain road after dark, his headlights cutting through fog that had settled over the valley. He parked his truck and sat there for a long time, staring at the shelter that stood silver gray in the moonlight. Then he got out and walked to the structure. Linnea was inside, checking the seals around the door, making small adjustments. She heard his footsteps and opened the door to find the old carpenter standing there with an expression she did not recognize. "Can I come in?" Harold asked. Linnea stepped aside. Harold Brennan entered the shelter slowly, his eyes moving over every detail. The curved walls, the smooth ceiling, the perfect geometry that broke every rule he had ever learned. He stood in the center and turned in a slow circle. "It is warm," he said finally. His voice was strange, almost wondering. Without a fire, and it is warm. Thermal mass, Linnea said. The clay absorbs heat during the day and releases it slowly. Harold nodded, but she could tell he was not really listening. He was feeling. For the first time in decades, he was letting himself feel something that contradicted everything he thought he knew. Your grandfather tried to teach me this, he said. The words came out rough, painful. 30 years ago, he came to my workshop with drawings just like these, showed me calculations I did not understand. Told me the old ways had value, that strength was not the same as stiffness. Linnea waited. I laughed at him, Harold continued. Told him I knew my trade. Told him American buildings were better than anything from the old country. He walked away, and I never spoke to him again. 6 months later, he was dead. He turned to face her. His eyes were wet. When I heard you were building this, I thought it was my chance to prove I was right. That his designs were foolish. That all that old knowledge was worthless. And now, Linnea asked quietly, now I am standing inside something that should not exist. Something that breaks every rule I ever learned. And it feels more solid than anything I ever built. He reached out and touched the curved wall. I was wrong, he whispered. All these years, I was wrong. Before you keep going, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to admit you were wrong about something important? Something you believed for years? Something that shaped how you lived your life? It takes courage to change your mind. Real courage. The kind most people never find. Think about Harold Brennan, 63 years old, 46 years of experience, and brave enough to say 3 words that most people never manage. I was wrong. If this story is making you feel something, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like this matter. November 21st began warm. Too warm. 62 degrees at sunrise, with a stillness in the air that felt like held breath. The sky was cloudless, but wrong. A color that was not quite blue, not quite anything. Linnea woke before dawn with a weight in her chest that had nothing to do with physical sensation. Copper was already awake, standing at the door of the shed, staring west. She got up and went outside. The clouds were coming. Not ordinary clouds. These came in layers, stacked on top of each other like pages in a book, moving in different directions at different speeds. The lowest layer raced northeast, while the highest layer drifted slowly south. The effect was disorienting, nauseating, wrong. Linnea grabbed her grandmother's notebook and flipped to the final pages, the ones she had avoided reading, the ones that described what happened when all the signs aligned. Rapid pressure drop, layered clouds moving in contrary directions, unusual warmth followed by temperature collapse, green-gray light, total silence. She looked up. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind, nothing. Wren, Linnea said. Her voice came out steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Wake up, get dressed. We need to move to the shelter now. Wren sat up, instantly alert. The survival instincts honed by years in institutional care, where trouble could arrive without warning. What is happening? The storm. Linnea said. It is here. They reached the shelter at 10 in the morning. The sky had changed again. The green-gray color was deepening, spreading, and the clouds had begun to rotate. Slowly at first, then faster, a vast spiral that covered half the visible sky. Emmett Cole came running up the mountain road at 11. My father's radio, he gasped. The weather service. They are saying something is forming. They do not know what. They have never seen readings like this. Get inside, Linnea said. Emmett hesitated. My family. My father, my mother, my sister. Linnea looked at him. There is no time. If they will not come, you cannot make them. But you can survive. Emmett stood there torn as the sky darkened above them. Then Martha Briggs appeared on the road, walking faster than Linnea had ever seen her move. It is coming, Martha said. Her face was pale. I can feel it in my bones, the same way I felt the flood of 37. The same way I felt the ice storm of 42. Something terrible is coming. She looked at the shelter. Thank God you finished, she said softly. Thank God you did not listen to any of us. At 2:47 in the afternoon, the tornado touched down. It came from the west, dropping out of the rotating clouds like a finger of God reaching down to touch the earth. Not thin and elegant like the tornadoes in movies. This one was wide, almost half a mile across, a churning wall of wind and debris that seemed to fill the entire horizon. The sound reached them first, a roar like every train in the world running on every track at once. A sound so loud it stopped being sound and became a physical pressure, a weight that pushed against the chest and made breathing hard. Linnea shoved everyone inside. Wren, Emmett, Martha, Copper, who had to be carried because he would not stop barking at the sky. She slammed the door shut and threw the latch just as the first debris began to fall. Branches, leaves, shingles torn from roofs miles away. Then bigger things, pieces of wood, metal, a window frame that hit the door with enough force to shake the entire structure. The roar intensified. Linnea pressed her back against the curved wall and felt the wind trying to find purchase, trying to grip something, push against something, tear something apart. But there were no corners, no flat surfaces, no edges for the wind to grab. The force slid around the shelter like water around a stone. Outside, Ridgewood Hollow was dying. The tornado cut through the valley for 11 minutes. 11 minutes is not a long time. You can make a cup of coffee in 11 minutes. You can watch a preview of a movie. You can drive from one end of a small town to the other. You can also watch everything you ever knew be erased from the face of the earth. The tornado destroyed 23 homes completely. 41 more suffered major damage. The Methodist Church lost its roof and 2 walls. Carver's store disappeared entirely, leaving only the foundation. Barns collapsed. Cars were picked up and thrown. Trees that had stood for 100 years were snapped like matchsticks. 3 people died. Thomas Wheeler, 78, who refused to leave his porch. Margaret Lawson, 65, who went back for her cat. Tommy Briggs, 3 years old, Martha's great-grandson, who was in a house that should have been stronger than it was. Inside the shelter, 13 people huddled against the curved walls. Linnea and Wren, Emmett Cole, Martha Briggs, and 9 others who had come running when the sky turned green, who had remembered the strange round building on the hill, who had decided in those final desperate moments that maybe the girl who watched the weather was not so crazy after all. Sheriff Roy Tatum was among them. He had been driving up the mountain when the tornado touched down, had seen his squad car lifted off the road and thrown into a ravine, had crawled the last quarter-mile on his hands and knees with his 5-year-old daughter Sarah in his arms. Sheriff Tatum had been the one who delivered the 60-day ultimatum. He had stood in this very spot, hand on his gun belt, telling her that if she could not prove herself, he would take her sister away. Now he knelt on the floor of her shelter, his uniform torn and bloody, his daughter clutched against his chest. The little girl was maybe 5 years old, with her father's dark hair and eyes wide with terror. The sheriff looked up at Linnea. His face held something she had never seen there before. Not authority, not suspicion, not the cold calculation of a man enforcing rules he did not question. Fear, gratitude, shame. "My house," he started, then stopped. His voice broke. "My house is gone. My wife is. I do not know where my wife is. I was driving home when it hit. The car just lifted off the road like it weighed nothing. I grabbed Sarah and I crawled. I did not know where else to go." Linnea knelt beside him. "You are safe now," she said. The little girl, Sarah, turned her face toward Linnea. She had been crying, but no tears came anymore. She was past tears, in that hollow place where children go when the world stops making sense. "Is the monster gone?" Sarah whispered. Linnea reached out and gently touched the girl's hair. "The monster is gone," she said, "and it cannot get in here. These walls are too strong." Sarah looked at the curved ceiling above them. "Why are they round?" "Because round things are stronger than square things," Linnea said. "My grandfather taught my grandmother, and my grandmother taught me." Sarah considered this with the seriousness that only children can bring to new information. "I like round things," she decided. Despite everything, Linnea almost smiled. Linnea had opened the door for him. She had opened the door for the man who had threatened to take Wren away, who had given her 60 days to prove herself, who had represented everything that wanted her to fail. She had opened the door without hesitation. Because that was not what the shelter was for. It was not for proving she was right. It was not for vindication or victory or any of the small satisfactions that revenge might bring. It was for survival, all of theirs. The silence after the tornado was worse than the sound. It fell so suddenly, so completely, that for a long moment no one moved. They sat in the dim interior of the shelter, pressed together, listening to their own breathing and waiting for the world to end again. But the world did not end. Slowly, carefully, Linnea stood up. She walked to the door. Her hand trembled as she reached for the latch, but she did not hesitate. She opened the door. The light that flooded in was strange, golden, filtered through dust and debris that still hung in the air. She stepped outside and looked at what remained of Ridgewood Hollow. Nothing was the same. The trees that had lined the mountain road were gone or stripped bare. The distant roofs of townhouses had vanished. The church steeple, visible from the property for as long as anyone could remember, was no longer there. But the shelter stood, not damaged, not cracked, not even shifted on its foundation. The curved walls rose against the devastated landscape like something from another world, something that had always been here and would always be here, immune to the forces that had destroyed everything else. One by one, the others emerged. They stood in a ragged line, staring at the destruction, at the shelter, at each other. No one spoke. There were no words for what they were feeling. Then Sheriff Roy Tatum fell to his knees. He was still holding his daughter, a small girl with tangled hair and eyes too wide with shock. He looked at the shelter. He looked at Linnea. "You saved her," he said. His voice cracked on every word. "After everything I did, everything I said, you opened the door." Linnea did not know what to say. She had not thought about it. There had not been time to think. She had just acted on something deeper than thought, something that came from her grandmother and her grandfather and all the generations before them who had learned that survival was not about being right. It was about being ready. Sheriff Tatum's wife, Eleanor, was found 2 hours after the storm passed. She had taken shelter in a neighbor's root cellar when the tornado struck. She was bruised and frightened, but alive. When the family reunited outside the shelter, Eleanor Tatum looked at Linnea for a long moment. "Roy told me," she said, "about the council meetings, about what they were planning." Linnea said nothing. "I am sorry," Eleanor said. The words came out rough, painful. "We were so busy being certain about how things should be done that we almost destroyed the only person who knew how things actually needed to be done." "It is over now," Linnea said. Eleanor shook her head. "No, it is not over. It is just beginning. And my husband and I are going to make sure that everyone in this town knows what you did, what you built, and what we almost lost because we were too proud to listen." Harold Brennan arrived 3 hours later. He had walked 2 miles from town through debris fields and fallen trees, stepping over wreckage that had been homes and businesses and lives. His clothes were torn. There was blood on his forehead from a cut he did not remember getting. He stood at the edge of the Thornwood property and looked at the shelter. 46 years, he said. His voice was barely audible. 46 years of building. Every house in this valley, every barn, every church. He looked at Linnea, and a teenage girl builds the only thing that survived. He walked forward slowly, reached out and touched the curved wall, ran his calloused hands over the smooth surface that his experience had told him was wrong, was foolish, was doomed to fail. "Teach me," he said. Linnea shook her head. "I cannot teach you. I learned from notebooks, from a grandfather I never met and a grandmother I barely knew." "Then show me the notebooks," Harold said. "Show me where you learned this. Because I spent my whole life teaching people the wrong way to build, and I do not want to die with that on my conscience." The days after the tornado blurred together in a haze of grief and work and slow rebuilding. The shelter became a command center of sorts. People came for warmth, for safety, for the simple comfort of curved walls that had proven they could stand when everything else fell. Linnea and Ren shared their food, their water, their space. Copper moved among the survivors, letting children pet him, sitting with adults who stared at nothing. The death toll was confirmed on the third day. 3 people, 3 lives that could not be rebuilt, could not be restored, could not be brought back by any amount of wisdom or preparation. Martha Briggs buried her great-grandson on the 4th day. She stood at the small grave with a face carved from stone, and when it was over, she walked to the shelter and sat down beside Linnea. "I keep thinking," Martha said. Her voice was flat, drained. If I had insisted they come with me, if I had not assumed they had time, you could not have known, Linnea said, but you knew. Martha turned to look at her. You tried to warn us. You walked into Carver's store and told us a storm was coming, and we laughed. Linnea had no answer for that. The truth was heavy and complicated and did not fit into simple sentences. You built something that saved 13 lives, Martha continued. My great-grandson is dead, and that is a grief I will carry forever. But 8 of those 13 people have children. Children who still have parents because of what you built. She reached out and took Linnea's hand. That matters, she said. That has to matter. 3 weeks after the tornado, Linnea returned to the ruins of her grandmother's house. Most of the debris had been cleared away in the initial rescue efforts, but the stone foundation remained, a rectangular outline that traced the shape of rooms that no longer existed. Linnea walked the perimeter slowly, remembering summers spent here as a child, the smell of baking bread, the sound of her grandmother's voice singing Norwegian lullabies. Wren found her there, standing in what had once been the kitchen. What are you looking for? Wren asked. I do not know, Linnea admitted. Something. Grandmother was so careful about everything. She planned for us to come back. She started building the shelter before she died. She left the notebooks, the letters. It feels like there should be something more. Wren walked to where the wood stove had once stood. The stove itself was gone, salvaged weeks ago for its usable iron. But beneath where it had sat, the floor stones looked different, newer, more recently laid. Linnea, Wren said, look at this. They pried up the stones together, working carefully with hands that had learned patience through months of building. Beneath the third stone, they found a metal box, rusted at the edges but still solid. Inside were 4 things. The first was money, $3,200 in pound, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. More money than either girl had ever seen in one place. The second was a complete set of property documents. Deed, survey, title registration. Everything properly notarized and legally filed. Irrefutable proof of ownership that no council, no Josiah Carver, no 60-day deadline could ever challenge. The third was their grandmother's final will and testament, written in her own hand and witnessed by a lawyer in Charleston. The will contained a single clause that made Linnea's breath catch in her throat. This land shall never be sold, it read. It belongs to the Solvang bloodline in perpetuity. Should my granddaughters predecease me or choose not to claim it, the land shall be held in trust for their descendants, or failing that, donated to the state of West Virginia as a historical preserve. But it shall never, under any circumstances, be sold to private interests. Astrid Solvang had known. She had known about people like Josiah Carver, about the underground spring, about the vultures who would circle the moment she was gone, and she had made absolutely certain they would never succeed. The fourth item was a set of architectural drawings, not for the small shelter that Linnea had built, but for a complete house. Multiple domed rooms connected by curved corridors, a design that incorporated everything Eric Solvang had learned in Norway and everything Astrid had added in 50 years of careful observation. A note was attached to the drawings. For my girls, it said, build this when you are ready, make it your home, fill it with children and laughter and the sound of winter wind that cannot touch you. This is my gift. This is your grandfather's legacy. This is what we dreamed of for you before you were even born. Wren was crying. Linnea realized she was crying too. She knew, Wren whispered. She knew everything. She planned for everything. Linnea folded the drawings carefully and pressed them against her chest. Not everything, she said. She did not plan on us finishing the shelter in time. She did not plan on us surviving the tornado. That part was up to us. She looked at the money, the documents, the will, but she gave us everything we needed to build a future. All we had to do was live long enough to claim it. I want to pause here and ask you something important. Think about the people who came before you, your parents, your grandparents, maybe great-grandparents you never met. What did they leave behind? Not just money or property, but wisdom, knowledge, the things they learned through hard experience that they tried to pass down. Have you listened? Have you really listened? Astrid Solvang spent 30 years preparing for granddaughters who might never come. She saved money she could have spent. She preserved knowledge that everyone around her dismissed. She built the beginning of a shelter she knew she would never finish, all because she believed that someday someone would need what she had to give. Who in your life has done that for you? And what are you doing to honor it? Take a moment to think about that. And if this story has moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is pass along a story that matters. Pastor Daniel Whitmore came to the shelter on the fifth day. He had been at the church when the tornado hit, had watched the roof lift off like a lid being removed from a jar, had crawled into the basement and prayed while the world came apart above him. He stood now in the doorway of the shelter, looking around at the curved walls, the people resting inside, the quiet warmth that permeated the space. "I owe you an apology," he said. Linnea looked up from where she was sorting supplies. "For what specifically?" "For all of it." The pastor's voice was heavy with something that might have been shame. The council meetings, the 60-day deadline, the assumption that two young women could not possibly know what they were doing. He stepped inside, ducking slightly, as if the ceiling might judge him. "I have preached for 30 years about listening to God's wisdom," he said, "about trusting in things we cannot see. And when God sent two girls with exactly the knowledge this town needed, I tried to send them away." Linnea considered him for a long moment. "We all have to live with our choices," she said finally. "What matters now is what you do next." Pastor Whitmore nodded slowly. "What I do next is support the rebuilding, with whatever resources the church has left, with whatever influence I still have. And I would like you to teach me about these designs, about why they work, about what else your grandfather knew that we have all forgotten." The rebuilding began in earnest that same week. Harold Brennan became something he had never been before, a student. He arrived at the shelter every morning with his tool belt and his questions, ready to learn techniques that contradicted everything he had practiced for nearly half a century. "Show me again," he would say. "Show me how the steam box works. Show me why the curves matter. Show me what makes this different." And Linnea would show him, patient, methodical, passing along knowledge that had traveled from Norway to West Virginia, through her grandfather's careful notes, through her grandmother's preserving hands, through her own determination. Wren recorded everything, her sketchbooks filled with diagrams and drawings, a visual record of principles that had nearly been lost. She had a gift for making complex things clear, for seeing how pieces fit together, for translating mathematical precision into images anyone could understand. Emmett Cole worked beside them, the boy who had helped in secret now helping openly. His father Abel had not spoken to him since the tornado, but Abel Cole's house had been damaged beyond repair, and his stubborn silence was no match for the reality of winter coming. One morning, Abel Cole came walking up the mountain road. He stood at the edge of the work area, watching his son help bend a wooden beam into a careful curve. His face was hard, set in lines of pride and pain, and something else that might have been the beginning of acceptance. Emmett saw him but did not stop working. Finally, Abel spoke. "I do not understand what you are building," he said. "It goes against everything I know." Emmett straightened up. "Everything you know did not survive the storm, Father." Abel flinched, but he did not leave. He stood there watching, and after a while he picked up a tool and started helping. He never apologized. Some people cannot find those words. But he showed up every day after that, working alongside his son, learning alongside the rest. Sometimes that is enough. By spring of 1953, 7 new structures had been built in Ridgewood Hollow. Not all of them were fully round. Some people could not let go of corners entirely. But everyone incorporated the principles from Eric Solvang's notebooks. Curved roofs that shed snow, reinforced joints that flexed instead of breaking, thermal mass that moderated temperature, east-facing entrances that turned away from prevailing winds. The town council quietly forgot about the 60-day deadline. Nobody mentioned child welfare services. Nobody suggested separating Wren from her sister. Instead, they issued Linnea a formal commendation. She kept it folded in her grandmother's wooden box, beside the photograph of her father as a boy, beside the letters that had guided her through the darkest time. Linnea and Emmett Cole married in the summer of 1955. The ceremony was held on the Thornwood property, beside the shelter that had started everything. Wren served as maid of honor. Harold Brennan gave the toast, his voice rough with emotion as he spoke about learning and unlearning and having the courage to change. They built a house together, Emmett and Linnea, a larger version of the original shelter with multiple domed rooms connected by curved corridors, exactly as her grandmother's final drawings had shown. It became famous in the region as an example of what was possible when old wisdom met new determination. Wren stayed close. She became an artist, known for paintings that captured the wild beauty of the West Virginia mountains. Her work hung in galleries in Charleston and Richmond, but the piece she was most proud of was a simple watercolor of the original shelter, painted from memory on the anniversary of the tornado. She titled it What My Grandmother Knew. Copper died in the autumn of 1960. He was 11 years old, ancient for a dog his size. He passed peacefully in his sleep, curled up in his favorite spot beside the wood stove in the shelter that had never been abandoned, that still served as a gathering place for the community on cold nights and stormy days. Linnea buried him beneath the old oak tree on the property's highest point, the spot where you could see the entire valley spread out below. She marked the grave with a simple stone. Copper, it read, who watched over us all. Harold Brennan died in the winter of 1965. He was 76 years old. In the last 12 years of his life, he had trained 47 people in the building techniques he had once mocked. His workshop, rebuilt after the tornado with curved walls and reinforced joints, had become an informal school for anyone who wanted to learn. Before he died, he wrote a letter that his son found after the funeral. I spent 63 years thinking I knew everything, the letter said. 2 orphan girls showed me I knew nothing that mattered. If I did any good in my last years, it was because they were brave enough to build something different, and I was finally smart enough to watch. He asked to be buried near Copper, near the oak tree, near the shelter that had changed everything. Linnea honored his request. The original shelter still stands today. In 1978, engineers from West Virginia University came to study it. They ran tests, made measurements, wrote papers. Their conclusion was what Linnea had known all along. The curved design reduced wind resistance by 67% compared to conventional construction. The thermal mass maintained stable internal temperatures with minimal additional heating. The structure had experienced no significant settling or damage in 26 years. They called Eric Solvang a pioneer in storm-resistant design. They recommended his principles be incorporated into modern building codes. Linnea read their report and thought about her grandfather, who had died believing no one understood. About her grandmother, who had spent 30 years preserving his knowledge. About her father, who had run away because he could not bear to be different. Different was all that had saved them. There is a bronze plaque now, mounted on a stone beside the shelter. It reads, built in 1952 by Linnea and Wren Thornwood, following designs by Eric Solvang, 1889 to 1945. This structure sheltered 13 lives during the November 21st, 1952 tornado. May we all have the courage to build something different. Linnea is 89 years old now. She still lives on the property, in the house she and Emmett built together. Emmett passed 5 years ago, but his presence remains in every curved wall, every careful joint, every beam bent with steam and patience. Wren visits every Sunday. They sit in the original shelter sometimes, these 2 sisters who were once orphaned children with nothing but a wooden box and a copper-colored dog. They drink tea and remember. They remember their grandmother Astrid, who waited so long for granddaughters who came too late to say goodbye. They remember their grandfather Eric, who brought old knowledge across an ocean and could not make anyone understand. They remember the people who laughed and the people who helped, and the line between those groups that turned out to be thinner than anyone expected. Most of all, they remember the night of the tornado, the sound of the wind, the pressure of bodies pressed close in the dark, the moment the door opened and they saw what had survived. Not just a building, a legacy. I want to leave you with one final thought. Astrid Solvang used to say something in Norwegian that Linnea never forgot. Den som venter på något, venter ikke forgjeves. It means, those who wait for something good do not wait in vain. But I think the real lesson is not about waiting. It is about building. It is about believing in something when everyone else is laughing, about doing the hard work when no one is watching, about preparing for storms that have not arrived yet, because the storm is always coming. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but coming. What are you building? What knowledge have your grandparents passed down that you have not yet learned? What curved walls are you meant to construct in a world that only understands corners? I hope this story has given you something to think about, something to feel, maybe something to do. If it has, please subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like this one, stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things, about wisdom that survives across generations, about the quiet courage it takes to be different. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who feels alone, someone who is building something that others do not understand. And remember what Linnea learned on that November day in 1952? The people who laugh today may need your help tomorrow. Build the shelter anyway. Open the door anyway. Be ready anyway. Because that is how legacies are made. Not in victory, in kindness.